Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Philanthropy Roundtable for our program. Today, we'll be covering a primer for funders, policing reform in 2020. I'm Debbie Gatte, and I joined the Roundtable in late June as its Vice President of Strategy and Innovation, and I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to support all of the wonderful work you do. Our mission here at the Roundtable is to support philanthropic excellence, protect philanthropic freedom, and help funders advance liberty, opportunity, and personal responsibility. Our topic today certainly touches on all three of these areas. A proper rule of law with various levels of government playing their proper role is essential to protecting our liberties. Those working in criminal justice reform have identified potential obstacles to opportunity arising from the law enforcement aspects of that system. And finally, personal responsibility on the part of both officers and citizens has been an important part of the debate. The Roundtable's tagline is strengthening our free society, which indicates there is room for us to do even better and that vigilance is necessary. We've been hearing so much about police reform in the news since early June. So many slogans, some of which are just not fit to repeat here. In the meantime, we know that effective and proper law enforcement is essential for a free society, as is the protection of constitutional rights. So what needs our attention today as funders? Where should we focus when it comes to local, state, and national policing issues? I'm pleased to invite and welcome our wonderful panelists who are here today to help us sort through the issues. I'm going to take a moment to introduce each of them, and then we will start our conversation. So Dale Sutherland, who appears to have dropped off of screen for a moment. Let me introduce Tony Woodley first then. Tony is Executive Vice President at State Policy Network, an organization that cultivates and supports pro-liberty state think tanks from coast to coast. Tony previously served as president of the Bill of Rights Institute, and before that, the Market-Based Management Institute. He has also served as the president of the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. He is an alumnus of the University of North Carolina, has a PhD in political science from the University of Michigan, and an MFA from Wichita State University. And he's written a lot. All right. Adam, say hello, Adam. Adam has been working for a more just and effective criminal justice system throughout a 33-year career as a journalist, congressional aide, senior staff government official, and a nonprofit executive. Before launching the council, Gelb led the Pew Charitable Trust's criminal justice work, helping 35 states adopt sentencing and corrections reforms. He has staffed the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, led the development of public safety initiatives for governors in Georgia and Maryland, and even covered crime as a reporter in Atlanta. So welcome, Tony and Adam. Dale, who I hope will reappear in a moment, Dale served as a police officer in Arlington, Virginia for 3 years, and then joined the District of Columbia Police Department in the late 1980s. He worked in vice, narcotics, homicide, gangs, and the gun recovery unit. Most of his time, he spent working as an undercover officer in the Washington, D.C., Atlanta, New York City, North Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia areas. For the last 5 years, Dale has started a nonprofit with the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation to address police and community relations. Now Dale and his team are working with police and community leaders to address through police reform using after-school programs, sex trafficking prevention programs, and other key interventions in under-resourced communities. So welcome to all three of you. Yeah.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, fine, how are you?
Very good.
You missed my sharing of your bio. It's an incredible background that you have, and I can't wait to talk to you about this issue. But can you share with us why you chose to form Code 3? What is it that led you to form that organization?
Well, in light of the, it was the events at Ferguson that started to get us thinking, and we met with Diana Davis Spencer Foundation, and together we decided to form something that could try to reform the way the police look at the community and the way the community looks at the police. So try to build more bridges along those lines. So we started that about 5 years ago.
Excellent. How many retired police officers are involved with your organization?
Oh, we have more than maybe 20 that actively are involved, and several are on the board, and several are working full-time with us.
Excellent. That's great. Now, why do you see policing as a local issue, even a community level, neighborhood level issue?
Well, because, I mean, frankly, the problems we're having even in the United States, I mean, the number of police contacts with the public are, you know, except for the state police, they're primarily county, city, local issues, and most of them in our urban areas, in our urban cities, which is where we're not really having these kind of problems with DA, FBI, many of the other partners we work with, but more with that urban and even the uniformed police officer generally.
Okay. So you're focused on the DC communities, and I would love to hear a little bit about what legitimate concerns you think people in the DC community might have about policing.
Well, I think, you know, there's a variety of things. One is, I believe there's a long history of negative interaction between African-American community and police in the United States. When I started on the police department, it would be now 30 years ago, a little bit more, I was working with guys who still were on the job, who were some of the earliest African-American officers on the police department at all. This was I was working with guys who had been involved in, my supervisors were about to retire, were guys that were involved in arresting for segregation. I mean, this hasn't been very long that things have changed. And so we've been in rebuilding mode, I would say, especially since the 70s and then the 80s and 90s and then really in the 2000s. So it's natural there would be some difficulty. But now what we've got to do is forge forward on how to help the DC community and others to get along and to work together in a way that's positive and helpful to them.
Okay, thank you. Now, I imagine officers also have concerns. What are some of the concerns that officers in the DC area have as well?
Well, right now, I mean, one of the hardest things is being misunderstood. That's hard in life. That's hard anytime. But to be misunderstood and to be grouped with because of your uniform any more than because of where you grew up or whatever, that you are naturally a bad person, that's very difficult to take. And so guys, the large majority, just statistically, obviously, don't have ill intent when they start this job, but it's perceived. So I think it's almost getting to be like the Vietnam veterans coming back from the war in Vietnam. I mean, we're having officers that are spit on by normal citizens, by people just walking by, and the officer's not doing anything, no interaction. So it's been very, very challenging, and especially right now, I think.
There were some recent policing reforms in DC. What do you think of those?
Well, there's a bunch pending in the city council right now, and most of those are pretty outrageous. Sadly, even in the police reform discussion, we're not talking about often talking practically. You know, there are things that we've talked even about that you could absolutely say we could restructure the way we do policing, and we could have police emphasize policemen are not domestic counselors. Policemen are not mental health counselors, and they don't want to be. They don't want to be. We had a program 30 years ago where mental health people would go out with us on calls, and it was super helpful. I mean, we loved it. We just had to be there to make sure that the situation didn't turn violent. So in the same way, if there's a way we can work together to form options to where we can safely help counselors to help people with domestic, my guess is it's not going to save money, though. It's going to end up costing us more, but it may be worth that effort, worth that. But remember, the police aren't having these problems. It's generally speaking coming out of normal police enforcement, not every case. And so how do we change that? I think we've got to continue working in the changing of police mindset as well as working in the community.
So speaking of working in the communities, tell us about your upcoming pilot project in DC that you're getting ready to launch. Yes,
well, we're launching right now where we've got community members, churches and ex ex-criminals. We've got a mix of community groups, and we've got police officers. And what we're doing is we're measuring, we're analyzing, taking surveys from both sides before we start the project, finding out how they perceive each other, how the police perceive the community, how the community perceives them. But we're working in just one block so that we can actually maybe see if our interventions will make any change. And so we've got a list of interventions we're going to make where the community is going to go to roll calls and thank officers, tell officers what's it like to live there, tell their story. And then the officers are going to go and be in those communities, and the community is going to be able to see as the officers are serving the community. What we want to see is what is reasonable for us to do. Is this something that could scale? And if these interventions are effective, we could take them other places in the city as well.
That's great. So as a former police officer, what frustrates you about the conversation today?
I would guess that I want it to be constructive. I really want to change the situation. We don't want this to continue. And so I want to prosecute where there's clear crime by law enforcement under color of law. We all want that. And then I want to really emphasize the things that are the problem. There are significant problems with law enforcement, but I'm afraid most of the conversation doesn't address those. It's more talking about things that are perceived to be a problem, but are not the lion's share of the issue. There's perception issues that we need to change, and that would really begin to forge the community and the police together, we believe. We've seen it over our careers.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dale. For everyone, at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A button. Please do feel free to start putting questions in there for our speakers, and we will be collecting them, and we will run through them during our Q&A portion. So Dale, thank you. I'm going to turn now to Tony. So Dale, I hope I don't lose you, but I'm going to ask you to turn your camera off. Please don't disappear on me. All right, we'll see you in a bit. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Debbie.
So Tony, you're with SPN, and I'm wondering why SPN and its network has decided to take on policing reform as one of its issues. Could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So SPN is a coalition of think tanks and other groups that work in the states to restore a constitutional balance of power. And we advocate for, defend, state and local self-determination, self-governance. So for us, this is a matter of justice and practicality. So for the first item, justice, we have all these think tanks in the states that are working to create, environments where everyone can thrive. And so if you have even one agent of government that can abuse people's rights with impunity, without consequences, that undermines everyone's reliance on the law, period. And if you don't have rule of law, you don't have a thriving society. So it's a matter of justice. And then at a practical level, what we've seen in the past with other kinds of problems like this is that if the leaders in the state don't step up and start doing their job to defend the rights of their citizens, the federal government will come in and do it for them. And that is going to be expensive, it's not going to be effective, and it's going to be rife with all kinds of political point scoring instead of protecting communities. Okay,
let's drill down on that a little bit. So what are the kinds of issues within policing reform that should be dealt with at the state level?
So if we look at what the federal government has tried to do at the state level, it's not had the best history, whether you've got the 1033 program, which provides military-grade weapons to local police departments, civil asset forfeiture, which allows local police to profit from seizure and sales of property that isn't even connected to a crime. There doesn't have to be a conviction. And these programs have arguably tilted local police towards kind of federal level initiatives around narcotics and illegal immigration, and away from community policing. So at the state level, what we'd rather see is state and local governments police the police. Everybody remembers that terrible video of Rodney King being beaten in Los Angeles. What most people don't know is his brother went to a local police department the day after that beating and tried to file a complaint. He tried to do what you're supposed to do as a citizen. The officer at the desk wouldn't take his complaint and accused him of being a criminal too. So after that, the video comes out, and then you have the terrible rioting and people killed. And so then Congress passed in 1994 a big crime bill, which authorized the Department of Justice to look into complaints where there's a potential pattern and practice of abuse by local police. And they've done that in several cities with mixed results, but always with a very high cost. So our point of view at SPN is a simple alternative to that is to empower local or state attorneys general to do what the Department of Justice does. They're closer to the problem. They're more likely to hear about it sooner. They have better subpoena powers. They're accountable to the voters in a way that attorneys from the Department of Justice are not. And so our argument is they should be the ones defending the constitutional rights of their citizens. Related to that, another key area for states to intervene is we've seen that the collective bargaining agreements of police unions have a few provisions that make it very hard to hold bad apples accountable. Like their records are hard to keep track of because they're routinely purged. They have the right to get their heads together for a couple of days before they're interrogated after killing someone. And so it's going to be up to state legislators to change their laws so that these kinds of provisions are not allowed in these collective bargaining agreements.
That's a lot of different things. So I know that some of the think tanks that are in your network have started specific efforts. Could you give us some examples of things that the state think tanks are doing, specifics that they're doing in their area?
Sure. So just a few quick examples. The Empire Center in New York, they've done a lot to expose efforts to undermine local political control over police departments, exposing efforts in the legislature to essentially take review of police officers out of the hands of elected officials and put them in the hands of administrators who are more worried about whether the unions are happy with them. There's a think tank in Utah called Libertas. They've been exposing the use of revealing the results of excessive force investigations. They want to make that public. They want to make police wear body cameras. So they're lobbying for all that. In Georgia, we have the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and those and others are working to mandate collective bargaining transparency so all we citizens can see what's going into these police union contracts. Then you have the Goldwater Institute in Arizona, and they've been working tirelessly to end civil asset forfeiture, both in their state and at the national level.
Okay, great example. So what does SPN do to support those efforts?
Well, our chief priority is promoting federalism and a constitutional balance of power. So we want the states to do what is their job to do. So we're working right now with a national authority on police and union contracts to develop some model language that legislators could insert into police collective bargaining agreements that would protect the pay and the tenure of police officers, but take away some of these things that make it very, very hard to identify and deal with the problem officers. That's one thing. We're speaking to attorneys general offices all over the country, trying to make the case for this, and in general, pushing for more transparency in these union contracts, because our point of view is if you can expose these problems and you can empower local authorities to investigate and deal with police who are not doing their jobs properly, you're going to get a better outcome than relying on someone in Washington to do that for you.
Got it. Well, thank you, Tony. That was very helpful. So we've got Dale and his group working on a very local effort. We got Tony and all the organizations in the SPN network tackling things at the state level. And as Tony said, if things aren't happening at those levels, then sometimes we go to a federal level. Adam, I'm going to bring you in at this point to talk about the national issues. And maybe we could start by just having you help us understand what the national context is when it comes to policing reform.
Thank you. Terrific comments from Tony and Dale. I really appreciate it. I think maybe the best way, Debbie, to do this is to set the context with two numbers. That's what we try to do at the Council on Criminal Justice, is, among other things, to ground these very wrenching debates in facts and evidence and fundamental principles of justice and data. So I'd like to try to just do that here with a couple figures that I think are central to this whole debate. The first one is 240 million. The second one is 4%. So the first one, 240 million, is the estimated number of times a year that people call the police, call 911. That's 650,000 times a day, or 27,000 times an hour. For overall, an estimated 240 times a year that people call the police. And I think what that demonstrates, among many things, is that people want the police. People need the police. In fact, in polls and surveys, when you get beyond a lot of rhetoric that's out there today, you find that people in inner city neighborhoods, poor people, Black people, want police. They want more police, actually. They just want better policing. They don't want the police to be warriors in their neighborhood, but guardians. And the other really important aspect of this is that of all those calls, of course, many of them shouldn't go to the police in the first place. I know that very directly from my own experience, as you mentioned, as a reporter in Atlanta. I had the night beat and spent a lot of my time at the 911 center back in the 80s and in the early 90s when we were at the height of the drug war, and know very, very well that people call 911 for all kinds of reasons, including, really sadly, that sometimes at night they just don't have anyone else to talk to, and they know if they call 911, somebody will answer, and they can just engage them in conversation. So there's some large portion of all of that, all those calls that clearly shouldn't be going to the police, and that the police don't need to dispatch somebody with a badge and a gun to. Right now, I don't think we have a very good fix on what percentage of that is. Obviously, it's going to vary tremendously across jurisdictions, but some portion of that, some huge portion of that should be going elsewhere. Critical part of this conversation, whether you're talking about defunding or whether you're talking about reallocating funding and doing some of the things that Dale mentioned in partnerships, that's a huge part of the national context here.
Great.
Second, okay. The second piece is 4%. 4% is the total amount of state and local spending on police. And this is a hard figure for some people to hear, because you've probably been hearing figures that are more like 25 and 30%. And that would be the percent of many municipal budgets that's spent on policing. But as probably many people on this call are aware, county government and state government pays for social services and education and health, generally speaking, across this country. And so that's a number from the Urban Institute, which has looked at this over 40 years, from 1977 through 2017, and it has stayed flat at roughly 4% of total state and local spending at the different levels of government going to police. So there hasn't been some sort of massive shift toward spending on police. And the flip side of that, of course, Debbie, is that for many people in this debate, if you're looking for some massive transformation in the way society's resources are allocated, even if you did defund or flat out abolish police in many of these places, I don't think many people would be too satisfied with a middle single-digit level increase in the budget for these other things. So those are two, I think, hopefully grounding pieces of facts and evidence that people should have in their minds as they start to think about this in a serious way.
Interesting, yeah, and especially that first number is not one that we've heard much about, the demand. So Adam, I'm wondering if you could share with us your thoughts on this. I mean, for years we've been hearing that criminal justice reform has been a bipartisan effort. Is it a bipartisan effort? And are there any bipartisan efforts around policing reform in particular that we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see some, but Debbie, it's a great question. And I think the answer is that there has been tremendous bipartisanship over the past 10 or 15 years in particular, but that has focused on what us criminal justice nerds call the back end of the system. And the sentencing and corrections piece, right? There's sort of different strands, particularly of conservatism, that have woven together. There's the to support what has not been a traditionally conservative position, and that includes libertarianism, includes fiscal conservatism, includes sort of biblical, spiritual, redemptive strands. And from any of those angles, when you look at a huge criminal justice system that puts away so many people for so long, there was, and I believe still remains, a significant consensus across a conservative community that aligns with the traditional liberal perspectives here of social, economic, racial justice. And what that produced, really starting in Texas in about 2007, and then moving across the South and out west into the 35 states that you mentioned earlier, plus several others, was a wave of reforms to that dealt with what happens to people after they've been arrested and convicted of a crime. All those reforms focused on how much punishment should there be, who should go to prison, and for how long, and then how do we make sure when they get out the back end, are they less likely to claim new victims and return and recycle through the system. That culminated, I think, in a lot of people's minds with the passage and signing by President Trump at the end of 2018 in what was called the First Step Act. And I think there is still momentum there. Where we haven't seen this is on the front end and on the policing end that we're talking about now. And as a matter of fact, there was some movement, and aggressively so on this front, by the Obama administration after the Ferguson situation, the formation of a task force on 21st century policing, which was co-chaired by a woman named Lori Robinson, who's the chair of the board of directors of the Council on Criminal Justice now, along with her colleague Chuck Ramsey, who is on the police chief, who's also on our board of trustees. And out of that flowed a number of things, including something that's called a collaborative reform initiative. Tony mentioned before the pattern and practice investigations. That's the stick, if you will. These collaborative reform initiatives were basically the same type of things, but the carrot part of it, right? We can come after you legally, or we can work with you in partnership to try to move your department in a way that's going to be more reflective of constitutional principles and free of bias. And both of those things were stopped under Attorney General Sessions. Both the carrot and the stick sort of have been withdrawn. And now, as you're well aware, we really see some battle lines drawing here with in particular, some of the TV ads that President Trump has taken out.
So, okay. So what do you think are, I'm going to combine two things together here. What do you think are the key areas or key issues that need addressing at the national level? And tell us about the task force that you've just launched, because it is going to look at those national level issues. So what are the issues? And then what is the task force that you've convened through Council on Criminal Justice? What is that task force going to do?
Right. So at risk of giving sort of folks a laundry list of all the different proposals out there, I think I would say this at this point, that as critical as this issue has been for such a long period of time, and not just since Ferguson and Trayvon Martin and in the last 5 to 7 years, but for such a long time, it is really a sad thing that we have so little research on what works. Basically, what we have right now is people throwing a lot of spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think that's the right thing to do, particularly in the areas of accountability and transparency, and then all the issues dealing with police culture. Who's recruited? How are people trained? How are they acculturated to this job? And as Tony said, with, I hate to throw another number at you, but 18,000 state and local police departments across the country, and policing in this country being very state and local, the action is going to be at the state and local level, not necessarily at the federal level. All that being said, I think what that led us to, and when I say us, I mean the Council on Criminal Justice and our leadership team, which consists of some of the police leaders I just mentioned to you, as well as community voices, came and said, how can we best contribute to this debate and add some value here? And our collective decision was to form a task force of council leaders and members, a small group that would essentially say, what do we know from research about qualified immunity? What do we know about body-worn cameras? What do we know about all of these different things, all these different spaghetti strands that have been thrown against the wall? And summarize very short, quick pieces, 2-page summaries. What does the research say about the impact on accountability, on transparency, on unnecessary use of force, and where there are gaps in the research? What does this diverse group of leaders think is the likely impact of these kind of things? So we hope to start producing what would be a really critical set of resources for mayors, for governors, for police leaders, and everybody concerned about this issue. Where should you focus? What are the priorities here? What do we think is really going to get impact, and what do we think, based on research and some real experience here, is going to be less valuable?
Okay. Well, thank you, Adam, very much for that. I want to remind everyone to put their questions in the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. And I'm actually hearing that we've got a number of questions coming in, which is terrific. So I'm going to move us now to the Q&A portion of our discussion today. And before we start that, we do have a survey that we would ask all of you to fill out. We basically would love to hear more about what we can do to help your interests here. If this was helpful, please tell us. If there are other topics that you would like us to cover or questions that you have that we did not get to today, please tell us. The survey is in the chat. So if you see on the bottom there, pop up your chat box and the survey is there, and we appreciate the few minutes to do that. So we're going to move to the Q&A now. And I'm going to ask everyone to come back on camera. And I want to really thank my two colleagues, Tina Cordova and Tony Meyer, who are making this all go smoothly in the background here. Thank you, Tony, especially for fielding all these questions. And thank you, Tina, for getting all the text sorted out. Appreciate it. So Adam, if I could have you come back. And did we lose Dale again? I see we may have lost Dale again. Sometimes it just does not go smoothly on a computer. So let me start with some questions for for Adam and Tony. Here's a question. There have been some initiatives where police and social services providers, such as social workers or addiction counselors, try to tackle issues together. To avoid officers wearing too many hats and responding to issues they aren't trained to handle, could there be more collaboration nationally between these community safety services? Adam, want to start maybe with that one?
There absolutely can, and as Dale mentioned, I'm sorry he's not with us. Maybe he'll jump back in before we move off of this, because he's had the direct experience on the ground with crisis intervention teams long before they were called crisis intervention teams and been researched. I think from a very quick read of it, that there are a lot of benefits to that approach. And so it's the question I think before us now is not sort of whether that works, but how and when to deploy it. And, at the end of the day, is it something that actually costs less or frankly that costs more? Because, right, you have what is called co-responding here. And so you have two government employees going to the scene as opposed to one. And, yeah, I think the hope is, and I think everybody would share this, that it would be nice if you didn't have to have somebody with a badge and a gun and a uniform reply to a lot of these calls. But as Dale would say here, I think it's very, very hard, particularly if you're a 911 operator, to discern which is a call that's going to be okay to send somebody who doesn't carry a badge and a gun, and which one is more likely to escalate. And even as we move to that model, which we need to do, we need to be very careful and cautious and cognizant of the possible risk that that somebody going into one of those situations without proper training and an ability to defend him or herself can be in.
Mm-hmm. Tony, do you want to add to that?
Sure. The Bureau of Justice Statistics, there is no wide-scale reliable tracking of all people killed by police officers every year. So the data that they have, they say that about 10% of killings by police officers last year originated in a call to deal with a welfare matter, a medical matter, or a mental health matter. So that would suggest that you might have these escalations that you could have handled differently if you had people trained to deal with folks who are hurting, who are mentally ill. I know Portland, I believe it's Portland, they have a program where they're doing that. And they say that about 20% of their calls, they've got mental health experts who go out. The problem is you can't predict what somebody's going to do. And so you can't expect a mental health worker to suddenly to deal with someone who pulls a knife on a child any more than you can expect a police officer to understand how to talk someone out of killing himself. So that it's just a complex mess, but it's certainly the case that we're expecting people who get relatively low pay to deal with the worst kinds of problems in society at very high risk to themselves, and then shining a flashlight on them afterwards to ask questions about why they didn't do it better. And that doesn't seem entirely fair.
All right, I have a question that I'll ask the two of you, and if Dale rejoins us, he can add his answer as well. What is it that funders can do? So we have shared information about the local level, the state level, and the national level. What are the kinds of things that funders can help with? Because there's a definite government element to this. What can private philanthropy help with? And I'll start with Adam.
Well, I'll give you an answer you might not have been expecting here, but it feeds off of what Tony was just saying, which is the terrible state of data that we have on this, and relying on open source data, right? So I think a lot of people are thinking, and probably and hopefully engaged on this call in funding all sorts of local initiatives, and maybe ones that bring police and community together and otherwise. Which is fabulous. So I don't even necessarily mean to elevate this one, but they're one of the chief reasons why we don't know more is that the government has not done a good job of mandating this, requiring it, or just even facilitating the collection of it. If you want to stop short from that, right? The whole national crime statistics effort, which is called the FBI Uniform Crime Reports, is all voluntary. And the only crime data we have for even how many murders are committed and robberies and assaults and everything else is voluntarily reported from local police departments up through their states to the federal government. But would be to fund and create much better a system that collects much better and more accurate and timely data about crime, including the incidents of police misconduct.
Tony, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I think I love the organization that Adam is building. If we have a reliable, credible, nonpartisan organization with that kind of intellectual horsepower like he's putting together to get this kind of data and tell us, here are what the problems are, here are the best demonstrated solutions, we'll be so much further ahead than, putting our fingers in the wind or watching, news channels or looking at Twitter. So I think that's a clear thing that people should invest in if they care about this area. For us at State Policy Network, we're going to push forward on trying to modify collective bargaining agreements to allow for enforcement of the law against bad apples, which is going to require changing state laws. And of course, that means there's going to be litigation, trying to a whole issue campaign to get the solution in front of legislators to begin with. And so that's our bread and butter. So I'll get fired if I don't say, hey, consider what we're doing. And then I see Dale's back on, and I love what he's doing, but I'll let him speak for that. But I certainly commend it.
Dale, we're so glad to have you back. Welcome back.
Yes, this is killing me. Yeah, sorry, internet problems. I apologize.
Thank you so much for bearing with the problems and rejoining our conversation, because I think there's a lot of interest in what you had to share. So the question we're answering at the moment is, what is it that funders could do at these different levels to help advance the right kind of reforms? So I'm going to put that question to you as well. What do you think private philanthropy can do to help with policing reform?
Yeah, I think obviously we love what we're doing here, and we're trying to make more of a difference around the country. So we're scaling and we're working in different jurisdictions. So it's not just here in the DC area, but looking for these kind of things, and we can direct to other good programs in various cities. But the thing, to me, it seems like the work is going to be done. There's going to be done at two levels. It's an air war and a ground war. And the air war is legislation and working with unions and those kind of things for change. But the ground war is getting very practical. And you're finding that in this time, I think the private world can finance and fund programs that can actually make changes. So things that encourage the police are actually very important right now. So you think of wounded warriors, we're doing something with injured police officers that are permanently disabled, and no one's caring for them. This may be a time when we as a country can get behind those kind of initiatives, as well as being a support of the local police in a variety of ways, so that we begin to reestablish even children with police and try to reestablish that, because it's safer. Listen, it affects the communities way more than the actual police officers. I'm not advocating for police officers. They're going to be just fine. But what I'm advocating for is the overall situation in our country. We need the police to feel encouraged enough to go do their jobs. It affects all of us to do that. So more as a strategic point of view, I think that those things are critical, and the private world can make a huge difference in all of those ways. And there's, probably 10 different ways.
Okay.
Debbie,
So, yeah, please.
Can I just jump back in that quickly? And I hope this doesn't come off as sort of a shameless self-promotion here, but I think one of the reasons why you had me and Tony and Dale here today is that all three of us in our organizations are working to pull people together and looking to, in the various different ways and the various different levels that we're doing here, is to bring a diversity of perspective and help hold things together and resist some of the tearing apart that the country is going through right now. And so I just appreciate that's where you're coming from, and that you pull together folks who have that perspective. And I, having spent 12 years at Pew, just know in particular how important it is for philanthropy to orient itself in that direction and not get sucked into a debate about are we for or against the police, but how do we have safer communities and constitutional policing.
Well,
I guess part of our whole thinking is we're saying all the time, police and the community, you can be for both. You don't have to change. You don't have to choose. And right now, it's you can be ostracized on either end. I'll tell you this: in the African Americans' toughest areas of our city, with our team, we're seeing them being crowds of people applauding the police with some of the things we're doing. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people that really do care, and they want the streets safe. They just don't want a criminal breaking the law any more than they want a drug dealer out in front of breaking the law. The more we can, as a culture, try to get that understanding out and not allow it just to be driven by what we might see in one story or two stories, it may miss the big picture. And that's why I think all three of our organizations are a good way to move that ball forward.
So this leads right into one of the questions that we have from our audience. So we have a question here about language. Language matters. Can we come up with language that isn't negative? We don't need to take away, we need to add. Are there better words than reform, defund? Is there a more positive way to put what it is that we're looking for here? It's a good one. Good question.
They're brilliant, whoever asked it. They're absolutely brilliant. I mean, there's no question we can say, and I'm not the guy to do this, but that is absolutely right. Words matter a lot. And when you hear defund the police, you only feel, then everybody reacts. But if you say we want to aid the police or restructure the way they operate or restructure the way they, in a positive way, see, it's beneficial, most of the suggestions. So I think there's stuff there, but I'm sure Adam and Tony might have better on the exact wording. But when you think of restructuring or reorganizing in a way to support the community and the officers, I think that kind of thing, reorganization and so on, is positive. I
don't know if this counts as positive enough, but the watchword for me right now is accountability. I probably do come across as a little more negative because I'm angry about this, not just with police reform, but a lot of other instances where we see, especially at the state level, elected officials who swore an oath to protect not just the US Constitution, but their state constitutions, who either point to the federal government to solve the problem for them or blame someone at the local level while pretending that they're not responsible for the rules that folks at the local level have to live by. So for me, our focus is let's hold these state officials accountable for correcting the rules of the game so that the many, many good police officers are empowered to do their jobs, and the people who are in charge of protecting civil liberties are empowered to deal with the handful of bad apples that are ruining rule of law in our communities.
So accountability, there's one option. Adam, do you have any thoughts on language?
It's a really important question. And I think I hope there are some organizations that are doing some really good thinking and research about what different words are meaning to different people right now. I think we're in such a place now where, you know, we've seen the increase in violence in cities right now, well into the double digits, 20-30% increases in homicides so far this year. And we have some folks on the left who want to characterize that as an uptick. Whereas if you have a 5% increase in the number of COVID positive tests, that's a surge. And so, you know, with respect to policing here, we have people who are saying defund the police, and you have a lot of folks in the media saying, well, when they say defund police, they don't actually mean defund the police. They're just saying it that way. And then they come back and say, actually, no, we do mean, oh, we want to defund the police and even abolish it. Yes, we want to envision a world in which there are no police. And so obviously I don't know what the right words are right now. Reform used to be a provocative word for many on the right. My suspicion is right now that the word reform, that we ought to have police reform, is a fairly safe word that conveys that there needs to be change, and there are things that can be done that will improve safety and reduce bias and unnecessary use of force without leaving communities vulnerable, and frankly putting us in a situation where the only people who do have security and protection are the people who can pay for it privately on the side.
Yeah, I think, you know, one thing, Debbie, as to what Adam's saying, we were at a funeral this morning of an 11-year-old that was shot in the head in Washington, and the night before we were at a vigil of a lady on our advisory board lost her 10-year-old to a drive-by shooting as well. My point is this: the truth is, refocus, reorganize would be the kind of thinking so that we're able to actually say to officers, we want you to protect these children. We don't want you doing things that others could do. We want you doing the things only you can do. If we would emphasize that and then give them a lane to work in, one of the things we're finding with officers and with commanders even is the commanders are honestly saying, we don't know what they can do. Right now we know that on video that things go left and right in seconds, and even in normal policing, they don't know what they can do. Should they wrestle someone who's resisting and an alcoholic in somewhere? Should they do that only with a bank robber? What should they do? And so because of a lack of clarity from leadership and so on, it would really hope to say, let's refocus. Let's come out with 3 or 4 things we're going to try to emphasize, and to emphasize to them, we want you stopping crime. Don't get that confused. We want homicide. We want, you know, people to be out there working and protecting our kids, but we just don't want you over here where you're going to end up distracted and miss out maybe on the more important.
So Dale, thank you for sharing that. I mean, one of the questions that we have is around the rising violent crime. And do any of you have thoughts about this rising violent crime and its connection to current calls for police reform? Is there a connection there that you're seeing?
I mean, yes. I don't think you need any of the 3 of us to figure that out. I mean, to me, there's it's kind of basic humanity. If there's if it was all negative on teachers and we're in a school, then probably some of the bad kids in school would misbehave more. If teachers are seen as bad by every parent and every mayor and everything, then the schools are probably gonna suffer. The sad thing is all the little kids that get bothered in the school because the bully is acting up. And that's what's going on now. The police are saying, I mean, our gun recovery unit in this city, they recovered, hundreds of guns, 30 or 40 guns every month. Right now, they've stopped. Well, why do you want them to stop? That isn't a good idea. That wasn't a good conclusion of this. So you want to sit down and think very positively, what are some things we can do to get the officers able to go out there and protect us, at the same time to tell the bad guys, look, we're not going to misbehave like this. We're not going to allow that, because we've got some criminal policemen that have committed homicide in other jurisdictions or even in that jurisdiction.
Dale, I want to follow up on something you said in answer to the last question around the unclarity that officers have right now. What can they do? What can't they do? And you mentioned that leadership could focus in on 2 or 3 things and really clarify those. When you say leadership, who do you mean? And how would that process work? So how does that clarity get down to the officer who then has to act on the street?
Well, I'd say this: we're in an emergency. We have the longer term solutions need to be worked out, but we're in an emergency. So city councils across the United States, and as Tony and Adam have both said, the different jurisdictional direction, if we could have local jurisdictions say, even let's say Minneapolis, who really is anti-police right now, if they could at least say, hey folks, in the next 18 months between now and whatever change we're going to get to, here's 3 things we want you to do. Let's reaffirm, your protection. Let's reaffirm what we do. Those kind of clear encouragements from even those who are most concerned about police misconduct, it will help everybody to just give them a box to go in. I would think there could be, 10 things they could pull out of the local general orders or local law. I don't know, you guys probably could comment on that as well. But I think clarity for the actual guy on the ground doing it, it's as though we were in the war in Iraq and we're saying there's been some really bad things, maybe Abu Ghraib just happened. And so now you're a general and you've got to tell the troops, we still want you to protect each other. We don't want you to stop the war. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We just can't do it. It's America. It's our children that are suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And that is unacceptable.
Adam, do you have something to add on that? It's this question of how do we get clarity during this emergency situation on the ground?
Well, I don't know if I can add to what Dale just said. I think he nailed it.
Tony? Okay.
I agree.
You agree. Okay, excellent. So we have about 5 minutes left, just over 5 minutes. And I'd like to go back to each of you and just get your closing thoughts in terms of how you think police reform should go forward. What are the priorities that you see? And just reiterate for us what it is that we need to do, given that we are in an emergency situation, as Dale put it. And I'll start with Adam and then come down to the local level. Adam?
Great. Maybe two-part answer here is I'm really eager to get this task force funded and up and off the ground and running and producing these short assessments that people can understand and use and put to work on the ground in city councils, at state legislatures going into next year, so that we can distill the signal from all the noise that's out there right now and avoid some of the things that are flying around that flat out are going to be counterproductive. I want to use a little slice of the time that you've given me here to think a little bit longer term and outside the immediate emergency. And I don't think it's too soon to start this. And I think it's probably something that your roundtable members and folks on this call today here can focus on, both on a personal level as well as in philanthropy. And that is 3 numbers, 311. And I see Tony smiling, and Dale, we may have chatted about this before as well, but if the idea here is that yes, the footprint of police should be shrunk, and police shouldn't be responding to as much as they are right now. There's one way to do that, which is to try to have the existing system basically say, no, when you call us, sometimes we're not going to come. The other way to do it is to have people triage these calls in their own minds first, and to have people, if it's the case that people don't want a police officer to come to a certain call, let them make that decision up front, but give them an easy to remember number, 311, to call instead. You want social work to come, you want somebody else to come, call 311 and have a conversation in that context. And you're already getting people to start thinking, this is not an emergency. This is not something I need a badge and a gun and a uniform for. It's a different government service that I'm looking for here. Many cities have 311. And unfortunately, I think it's become kind of like, when you need help with the water services, and it shouldn't be. They're trained call centers with people who should be able to handle these non-emergency calls and farm them out to the right government agencies, and also have an accountability system there to track them and make sure that people do get response and understand what the response time is for those kind of calls. I think this is going to be, it doesn't feel emergent, but I think if we want to see this shift and reduce the police-citizen interactions that can spiral into situations here, we're going to have to use these kinds of things to help people move away from thinking and calling the police.
I'm going to have to check whether I have 311 service in my area. I don't even know the answer to that. Tony, last thoughts?
Sure, Debbie, and I'm going to answer in terms of how I see the organizations that Adam and Dale and I represent complement one another. So for State Policy Network, our primary goal in this area is to empower and expect the primary law enforcement official in every state, which is the Attorney General, to do their jobs, and then work with these collective bargaining agreements to remove the things that make it very, very hard to deal with law enforcement officers who break the law. But then from there, you look at what Adam's doing. They can bring all that data and research to bear to tell people at the state level and in local law enforcement, hey, this works, this doesn't work as well. That would be tremendous because they want solutions. And then if you look at what Dale does, thinking about what he does, I think of Solzhenitsyn's great line, that the line dividing good and evil runs through every human heart. And you look at about a lot of what he does in his organization is working on the human heart at the local level, in the community and police. And I think that in the end, that's the only way you heal a country is heart by heart. So that's how I see us working together.
Wow, Tony, that's great. Dale, last word to you.
Yes, I would say, it's going to probably sound strange, but I would say to get angry. Be angry enough with criminal policemen like we are. We all know that the conduct in Minneapolis has literally cost us lives and cost us pain in this country beyond belief. Be angry about that kind of policing. Be angry, though, at those kind of criminals that are hurting our society as well. Let's be angry enough at both that it causes us to act. But let's not just be angry at either side. The concrete would be thinking of ways that we can change the narrative before we repeat Vietnam and we end up vilifying all police across the United States. And we might think of things that, of course, we love our program to help injured, permanently disabled officers. We have an officer right now in Texas we just talked about this morning who literally shot in the head and can't get a van to get around with his family. So those things are very bad. We can support those. Everyone on all sides would support an officer who sacrificed that way. So anyway, that's one way, is to be supportive. Be a champion of those that are doing right on both sides. Be a champion of those programs where these same neighborhoods where kids are doing well and so on, and in the same way where police are doing well. So I think we can really be a positive voice. We need to get angry enough, though, to get on our checkbooks and to get ourselves involved locally and in the whole picture across the United States.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us today and for walking us through these issues. On behalf of everyone who's watching, I want to thank you for your time and encourage you in your efforts. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And please fill out the survey if you haven't had a chance to do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you.